What's going on, guys? My name is Wade with TechDaily. So if you're a viewer from outside the US, you're probably pretty familiar with OnePlus. They have a few different budget Nord devices, and of course their flagship phones, along with a ton of random things like earbuds and even a new tablet. If you live in the US, like me, OnePlus isn't really a well-known brand. And that's not my opinion. The most recent smartphone sales data for this year doesn't even show them having a measurable market share percentage. Their flagship phones just don't sell well here. But the couple Nord devices they release every year, their budget line, I think are great phones, and they should be selling better than they currently are. This phone, the OnePlus Nord N30, is far better than anything Motorola offers for its US customers. It certainly competes with Samsung's A series, and the overall value you get for your money, this phone is $269 right now, it's honestly tough to beat. One of the first things I personally like about buying a Nord, and particularly this N30, is that OnePlus gives you everything you need in the box, and more. And they haven't taken anything away from the phone itself, like a lot of other companies have done. You get their famous thick red charging cable and a big old wall plug to juice this phone up quickly. There's a screen protector already installed, and all this stuff that smartphone companies have taken away, like the micro SD card slot and the headphone jack, well, it's all still here on the Nord. OnePlus, in my opinion, also didn't compromise on the design. This phone doesn't look like some other sub $300 devices. It's modern, with a great screen-to-body ratio and relatively slim borders around the display, a hole-punch selfie camera up front. It's precisely 6.72 inches corner to corner, that's the screen size, which actually is a tenth or two bigger than most other Android phones. But it doesn't really feel that big because, like I said, there's no added bulk or wasted space around the display. The phone is also strangely light, like it doesn't weigh all that much, but that's because it's all plastic, which I guess is a compromise, but not unexpected for this price point. It's a good looking phone, though you'll always have fingerprints and smudges on it. Wiped clean, the chromatic gray finish, as OnePlus calls it, gives off a pretty premium vibe. Though the phone is actually closer to green than gray, I sort of wish it was a subtle blue to match OnePlus's color scheme, but not a big deal. And that flat edge makes feeling for the fingerprint sensor on the side really easy, which by the way is super quick. It's a great setup and placement, and I have no trouble getting into the phone even with the lightest of touch on that sensor. That big display on the N30 has 2 out of the 3 important features that I value in a viewing experience. It's an IPS LCD panel. I wish it were OLED, that's what's missing, but again, budget phone. It's a full 2400 by 1080 resolution though, and at this size, more than 6.7 inches, that's a must. You get a crispy 391 pixels per inch. It looks very sharp up close, and I emphasize this only because there are Motorola and Samsung phones in this price range with 720p displays, which I'm not a fan of. It's also a 120Hz high refresh rate display, which is sort of the cherry on top. You'll want to make sure that that's enabled. It wasn't on by default for me out of the box for whatever reason, but this gives you that fast, fluid, and ultra responsive feel that mimics a flagship phone. The actual viewing experience itself is pretty good. You're gonna get noticeable glare. Obviously, the front glass isn't anything noteworthy. LCD panels themselves aren't particularly bright, and this phone doesn't have a ton of brightness adjustment between like 30% and 90%. It kind of all looks the same, but it's a very bold and colorful looking display for what it is, which I think appeals to a lot of people. It visually presents a lot better than its specs would indicate, and I think most people who are familiar with this kind of phone in this price range would totally be happy with it. The out loud listening experience with this phone's dual speaker setup should be pretty good, but I found that at max volume, the speakers sound a little muffled and high pitched, almost kind of blown out. I like the dual speakers though. I'm glad this phone has it, but I'm going to say that a couple pips lower than max volume is the sweet spot for the out loud listening. When it comes to performance, I think this is where the N30 really shines, and it's where you get a lot of value for the relatively small amount of money you spend. Inside, this phone is powered by a Snapdragon 695 5G chipset, an Adreno 619 GPU. It also has 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes of built-in storage, which is a lot, but like I mentioned earlier, you could pop in an SD card if you wanted. The phone runs OnePlus's Oxygen OS over Android 13, and I personally really like OnePlus's Android experience. It's clean, it's very fluid, it's been regularly updated in the few months this phone has been out, and best of all, outside of a couple of OnePlus apps, there's not a whole lot of junk on this phone like you get with, again, Motorola or even Samsung sometimes. Now, to be totally honest, the Snapdragon processor in this phone is a bit old. It's nearing 2 years since its release. But I know there are people who just prefer Snapdragon chipsets in general, regardless of the tier or the age of the chip, and 8 gigabytes of RAM is even more than you get on like the Samsung A54. So this phone has plenty of power that for me has made it fast and reliable. I don't necessarily think this is a long-term device. Like, I can't see myself using it 4 or 5 years from now like a flagship phone, but for $300 and for what you get right now, I don't feel like this is on par with some of the slow, underpowered, prepaid budget phones you'd usually be suffering with. This is a way better experience than the rest, for sure. And if you push your phone a little harder each day, I think you're going to be pretty happy opting for this one. OnePlus also continues to value fast charging, more so than any of the other sub-$300 smartphones. I already mentioned you get the charging accessories in the box. They're nice ones at that. This phone supports 50-watt charging speeds, so you're going to go from 0 to 100 in well under an hour and really 0 to 40% in like 15 minutes or less. Compare that to any Moto device that gets 15-watt charging support, and it's not even close. The large 5,000 milliamp battery jammed inside this thing also lasts solidly throughout the day and beyond, even with the 120 Hz display. So charging and longevity are absolutely one of this phone's strong suits. The one area where OnePlus I think did settle on this phone is in the camera department, but the setup is arguably still better than some similarly priced phones. Around back, it looks like you get 2 cameras, but there's 3 lenses. A 108 megapixel main lens, a 2 megapixel macro for up-close pictures, and a 2 megapixel depth sensor for help with the portrait pics. The selfie camera is a 16 megapixel shooter, and inside the camera app, there's a lot of things like your pro controls and high megapixel mode and dual view video, but important stuff is lacking. No wide angle lens is a miss. I would have taken that over both the macro and the depth sensor, but I'm sure it was a cost saving measure not including it. The digital zoom maxes out at 6x, which is the lowest I've seen on a phone in a while. There's no 4K video recording, no enhanced stabilization, really just none of the stuff that an above average picture or video taker might want. And to be honest, the actual images and videos this phone captures are okay, but they're sort of inconsistent at times and look quite budget still. I think most people would be super happy with how colorful the pictures are, to say the least. These are vibrant, saturated looking images, but there's very little detail when you look close, and if there's bright or dark spots in your subject or the background, they get blown out or lost every time. The dynamic range is pretty shallow. The thing to keep in mind here, though, is that smartphone cameras on, say, $500 plus devices are really, really good. And smartphone cameras on sub $300 devices are still kind of bad. There's no middle ground, which is odd. So none of this is unexpected, but I still wish it were a little better. All in all, I feel like if people knew about the OnePlus Nord N30 and really had the opportunity to compare it to a similar $300 phone here in the US, they'd quickly realize just how good of a value it is. US customers don't really get a lot of the other options when it comes to smartphones. It's usually Samsung or Apple, and the budget phones are almost always Samsung. But OnePlus has the opportunity to not just take a chunk out of Samsung's market share of A-series devices, but also put Motorola in their place since they continue to screw customers with subpar devices. I just hope OnePlus continues to never settle with their Nord series. unlike what they've done with their flagship phones, but that's for another video. What do you guys think about the Nord N30? Let me know in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, of course. Hopefully you guys did enjoy this video though. Be sure to follow TechDaily on Twitter and subscribe to the TechDaily YouTube channel if you haven't already. And I'll see you guys later.